I'm Darren Morton,
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift.
the Lifestyle Medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and well-being.
Well, hello, Professor Morton. Nice to see you again.
Hello. Nice to see you, Simon. Always a pleasure.
I love calling you Professor.
Why, just not very fitting?
So it's a. but the Spanish word profesor just means teacher. It's not. I mean, it can probably be used in that tertiary academic sense to also mean professor, but it's a generic word for teacher. So.
You know,
Can I say I'm nowhere near the sort of quality that you are, but over here I still call myself professor.
you're a lot closer than you imagine. In fact, you probably surpassed. In fact, I remember when I did get appointed my professorship, the vice chancellor called me and she said, which was really quite insightful. She said, you know, a professor is someone who professes something, so it almost implies this message that you're passionate about delivering, and hopefully I would say that we both meet that criteria.
Yeah,
so
it's a great word, isn't it? It's a great word. Yeah. So I've got a question for you. First of all, can you recall a time when you decided to make some significant sort of health behaviour change in your life? And if so, can you tell me about it? Just briefly.
Yeah, I actually. All right. Well, I'll pick a lifestyle medicine one.
Yep.
I was actually involved in the development of a lifestyle intervention for diabetes, chronic disease. It's called the CHIP program.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I was doing most of it, I would say anyway. But I decided I was involved in a team running a program. So I was just sort of more sitting in the background. The team were doing this great job because we were wanting to see how the dynamic of this thing played out so we're sort of studying it a little bit. And I thought, I'm just going all in here and I'm really interested in how it affects my athletic performance. And so, I remember being very deliberate and very intentional about
that. Wonderful. And what things did you get intentional about at that time?
I would say it was mostly my eating patterns.
Mostly eating patterns.
So
okay.
I do like a little treat from time to time, and so I decided I tried not.
A treat. Is this a treat that has 9 letters, starts with C, and ends in HOCOLATE?
It could be. You know me too well, brother. So no, I was just actually, ate very, very well for a period of time, and normally I try pretty good anyway. But
okay, and I imagine you set yourself some targets in there for some things to observe and so on.
Well, the main thing I was interested in how it affected my athletic performance because I had an event coming up, and so I thought, I'd be interested to see how I go with that.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you got focused on deciding to make a behavioural change. You made some dietary adjustments, and you had an outcome to look at, and so on. There's something missing from your narrative, which is something that I've been thinking about just recently. And in fact, my thinking about it came from a podcast that I listened to. So, there are some truly brilliant people in the world. And for me, one of those brilliant people is Professor Matthew Walker from the University of California, Berkeley.
Yes.
And I've been listening to his podcast at the gym over the last couple of months or so. I listened to I think a series of 2 or 3 episodes within that podcast that really got me thinking about behavioural change, and we've talked about behavioural change on the podcast before.
Hey, so can I just jump in here for a moment? Just a comment on Professor Matthew Walker. He is a brilliant man, but he's actually an excellent presenter as well, which I greatly admire.
He is.
And what I remember, one thing I do remember is that he has a TED Talk, And so go check out his TED Talk. But I remember the opening line of his TED Talk because I enjoy presenting myself. And so I love to study presenters and see what they're doing. And I take particular notice of great ones, and he was very good. But is he Scottish or something? He has an accent.
No, he's English.
English.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, he said his opening line for his TED Talk was, "I'd like to start by talking about testicles." That was the opening line of the TED Talk, and I just always remember. I thought that's a way to engage an audience, right there. And then he went on to talk about how, in men that are getting less sleep than 5, I can't remember the exact statistics, that their testicles are 40% smaller or something. And I'm thinking, bang, there's a good reason to sleep more. So anyway, that's what I remember about
he's full of all these amazing factoids about sleep. So I think he's actually from Newcastle in England originally, but lives in California now. So what was glaringly missing from your account of what sounded like a very important behavioural change was some focused attention on getting good, proper sleep, particularly during the period of that behavioural change. And the more I thought about this and the more I started digging around this, the more I've begun to think this is a key part of the behavioural change message that I don't think we're focusing enough on. When it comes to behavioural change, we get focused on, for example, having a personally meaningful incentive, a why, if you like, that underscores why we might engage in a behavioural change. We get focused on setting goals. We get focused on creating a vision. We get focused on the importance of social support and social connection. We get focused on the importance of making sure that you've got all the resources that you have to make this behavioural change. If we're doing it well, we focus on the idea of learning rather than failure. So whatever happens as a result of your efforts at change doesn't represent failure necessarily, but it represents an opportunity to take this data, to reflect on it and think about how you might modify what you do next time. All of those are very, very important things. And we're completely missing the role that sleep plays in all of this. And sleep, I've discovered, actually plays a vital role in behavioural change. And this
is a really interesting insight for me, because you're right. In a sense, learning behaviour change is learning new skills, and it involves problem solving, and there's new patterns that get ingrained into our brain. So I'm really intrigued because I've had a great interest in sleep from the perspective of learning. In fact, I remember that the famous study that was done amongst college students who will do anything for money. Almost anything for money. And what they got them and they said, okay, memorize these things. They had half of the students go and take a nap, and then they had another half who they said, just do what you want to do, but come back. They all came back at the end and said, all right, you for every the second group, they said, for every question you get right, we'll give you some dollars. And yet it was, even though you college students do a whole lot for cash, it was the sleep. The people that had a nap and then came back, they could recite a lot more.
They did better. So, and that study's been replicated many times over. So
what happens?
Well,
why is sleeping good?
Okay, so we need to start firstly, I think, with a basic understanding of sleep, and many people will I think have this level of understanding already. In lifestyle medicine, we talk about the amount of sleep, and we talk about 7 to 9 hours, or another way of saying that is sometimes having at least an 8-hour window where you're available for sleep. And I like that phrase, being available for sleep. It means I've got myself to a state where when sleep comes, I'm ready for it. So I'm not sitting there with a device or lights on or eating or drinking or in conversation or anything like that. I'm ready and available for sleep. So we talk about that window in lifestyle medicine. But sleep, of course, is broadly made up of two patterns: deep non-REM sleep, and secondly, REM or rapid eye movement sleep. And the deep kind of slow wave sleep is the really restful, dreamless stage of sleep, which is mostly in the first half of the night. And REM sleep is mostly in the second half of the night. And, as the name suggests, vivid dreaming happens. Your eyes flick backwards and forwards madly as you're dreaming, and so on. So a really nice sleep pattern from the understanding that I've developed looks mostly like having deep patterns or cycles of sleep early in the night, followed by some cycles of light sleep as well, and then really an absence of deep sleep towards waking, and lots of REM cycles. Those two different sleep cycles, the deep and the REM, form very important specific functions with respect to memory and learning. So, for example, have a look down, say, at the desk. Just pick up an object for me. Any object on your desk. What's that called? What's that called? Paperweight. There you go. You're calling that a paperweight. How do you know that's called a paperweight? Well, you know, firstly, because you learnt the word, but secondly, because you had plenty of deep sleep. And deep sleep helps us to concretize those sort of declarative memories, things like names, dates, names of concepts, names of objects, and so on. That's the function of deep sleep. So we absolutely need deep sleep to be able to develop memories for those sorts of things. REM sleep, on the other hand, is really important for emotional and procedural memories. So skills, integrating feelings that we've experienced, emotional experiences that we've had, and finding a place for those within our broader experience. And this has been demonstrated. These elements of sleep have been demonstrated in many different ways, including through that experiment you just mentioned. So when we get a night that's really rich in deep, slow wave sleep, we get very good at hanging on to facts and data. If you miss that deep sleep, you won't be so good at that. So, for example, if you're studying hard for an exam, what's the best thing you can do? Don't stay up all night. Make sure you still get plenty of sleep. Otherwise, you're really minimising the chance that you're going to remember those things. On the other hand,
well, fortunately, all the students that I deal with here at the university very much take that advice on board.
Nice.
We do a lecture, or we do a week focused on sleep here with the students, and we'll have 100 in the lecture. I have 150, 200 students, and I always I say, come outside, and I want you now to line up from earliest to latest when you went to bed. And so they all organise themselves. It's a really interesting insight. And then what I do is I walk up to the person. This is of 150 students. Here is the earliest to bed. I say, what time did you go to bed last night? 10:30. And I think, wow. And so then I walk to the middle and I say, what time did you guys go to bed? Typically, it's about 1 a.m.
Wow.
So this is half. So half of the cohort were before 1 a.m. And I looked at that end and I just think, oh, no, I don't even want to know. But it's fascinating. I actually always go to the end, and we've always got a couple that didn't sleep that night before the class.
Yeah.
So
wow.
Yeah, university students. There's some learning to be done.
So absolutely, and sleep is very important for concretising and cementing that learning. And similarly, REM sleep. If you're learning how to ride a bike or play a piano piece or something like that, or even learning a new skill like weightlifting or using an elliptical machine at the gym or something like that, REM sleep is really important. And in fact, Matthew Walker talks about this, as I would imagine other sleep researchers do as well. When you kind of listen in to the brain waves of rats after they've been taught how to navigate a maze, they essentially replay that maze at high speed. And the way that this has been researched is fascinating. The researchers listen to the brain waves while the rat is learning the maze, and it makes a distinctive pattern of kind of coded sound, like a boop, 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 boop kind of
Sorry,
sound.
again, how did that go?
No, I'm not going to do that again. You've done this to me before. and when they're asleep, that's played back, but at high speed and repetitively. So it's yeah. So it's like their brains are just deepening and deepening and deepening that code for how to perform that particular skill. Absolutely fascinating.
That is fascinating. You know, I often talk with the students, and we talk about those engrams. You know, you actually, when you learn that skill of riding a bike, you etch in that pattern that makes those funky noises.
Exactly right.
But you know what's interesting?
So it's like grooves in a record.
That's correct. And by running it on repeat, you know, the more, you know, people often say practice makes perfect, and that's not true.
LIFT is supported by the LIFT Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The LIFT Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
Practice makes permanent, because like what's happening there, every time you do it, you're etching that. And by running it on high speed, I imagine it's just etching it in deeper and deeper. So, you know, one of the things I tell my students is, you know, practice doesn't make perfect. Only perfect practice makes perfect. And so it says something about the value of practicing a skill the right way and then etching that on repeat.
Yeah,
but that's
absolutely.
So that's happening during REM sleep, is it?
During REM sleep, that's going on. So your body is replaying to yourself processes that you've learned, emotions that you've experienced, and so on, in order to kind of integrate them into the bigger picture of you and your brain and your life and so on. But here's the really interesting thing: deep sleep. I mean, we talk about deep sleep being deep and restful sleep, and it can convey this idea that basically everything is shut down, you know, a little like sort of pulling the off switch, and there's just absolutely nothing going on. Well, in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. During deep sleep, your brain is very, very busy. And essentially what it's doing is reorganizing the day's experiences for you. And there's an analogy that's often used here, and it relates to the area of the brain called the hippocampus, which is thought of as the kind of hub of memory for the brain. And during deep sleep, your brain is taking memories from the day and moving them from the hippocampus, which is a bit like a thumb drive, a USB drive, and moving them into the hard drive or the neocortex in your brain.
Great analogy.
And sort of, you know, replacing them over there. And this does two really important things. The first, of course, is that it does that job of making more permanent. So we know that you know, data stored on a USB thumb drive, for example, can be easily overwritten. It can be overwritten on a hard drive as well, but it tends to be a longer lasting there. And we deliberately choose to put things on that hard drive when we want them to be permanent, when we want to hold them. USB drives we often use for temporary things. You know, I'll move this between here and there, and then I don't need it anymore. So that's one thing. The permanence is one thing, but the other really important part of this is that it empties the thumb drive. It empties the hippocampus, which unsurprisingly then makes room for more. So if we're not getting proper deep sleep, then our hippocampus kind of, in a sense, remains full, can't offload that data that it needs to offload, and therefore can't accept new data, can't get anything new in there. So the whole notion of the role of sleep in learning, I think, just gets more and more fascinating. When we can sort of I guess, literally clear the hippocampus, metaphorically empty the thumb drive, it means that we then come into the next day feeling sharper, clearer, readier for more, and therefore we're much more likely to, engage with those new experiences.
That's fantastic. I've got a question for you. Actually, I remember reading the book The Promise of Sleep many years back by Dr. William Dennett, I think his name was, and he was a pioneering sleep researcher. In fact, he in there he describes the story of when they first discovered REM sleep, and it was quite by accident. It was actually they noticed that one of the patients or the clients in their sleep lab eyes were behind closed lids going all over the place, and they thought they were fitting, and they actually went and woke them up, and the person woke up and said, "Oh, why'd you wake me up? I was having a lovely dream."
Having a fantastic dream.
Yeah, and this is when they realised that if you got woken up during REM sleep, you would actually remember the dream, and then if you didn't, often you wouldn't remember the things that you dreamed about. So obviously we're all dreaming at night time. So you mentioned that this deep sleep, very important for clearing the thumb drive. What's the role of REM sleep is playing in that learning process then, that memory process?
Well, REM is helping us to code those procedural and emotional experiences. So, for example, if you're learning to ride a bicycle, there's a lot of neuromuscular things that have to happen there. You've got to get the pedals turning a particular way. You've got to be holding the handlebars. You've got to be doing things with balance. You've got to be doing things with your vision, and somehow they've all got to be coordinated with each other. And the role of REM sleep in that context appears to be a role in which those procedures that we practice and assemble in order to be able to ride a bike get re-rehearsed while we're asleep. And therefore we come back to it the next day more able to do that. And in fact, we have a phrase in everyday English, when we have a problem with something, what do we often say? Sleep on it. Sleep on it, yeah. Don't perseverate with trying to fix it. Go away, sleep on it. And in fact, there's a lot of wisdom in that, because your brain, when it's allowed to sleep, then goes through its own process of continuing that work, even though you don't have an immediate awareness of it. REM sleep is also really important for the processing of emotion. This is one of the reasons why we often experience dreams emotionally. We don't just wake up with a declarative memory of a dream. We don't wake up and say, "Oh, I dreamt. I stood in a store and then I turned around and I left the store and I got in my car and drove home." Our dream recall is much more likely, I was in a store. I felt surrounded by people and really trapped, and I didn't know what to do. And I wanted to buy something, but I couldn't stand being there anymore. So I turned around and ran out the door as soon as and so on and so on and so on. So, our retelling about dreams is absolutely full of emotional description. And REM sleep seems to play a really important role in helping us to process emotional experiences of the day and allow them to find a place within our broader experience.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And obviously, dreams can be very, very emotional. We've all, I'm sure, woken up and had that time where you've gone, "Oh, thank goodness that's not real." That's done your dream. Your comment about sleeping on something, I gave myself the task of learning to ride a backward bike.
I remember this.
Yeah, the backward bike. So it's everything about the bike is normal, but it's just reverse steered. Actually, in less than 5 of the lift project, you actually see me, doing this, and people, and we were just doing it last week as a fun activity with some of our university students, and none of them can do it clearly because you've got another pattern etched in your brain,
Yeah.
which says this is how you ride a bike. And when you want to go that way, you turn the wheel that way. You just mess with that little part of that engram and it can throw your whole thing out. I've learned to do it. And they said, the students say, oh, how long did it take you? And how much did you practice? And the truth is I didn't practice that much, but I'd only do it in small amounts and I would do it like separated by a day. And what was really fascinating to me is often when I came back the next day, at the start, I was doing my best. And then I'd sort of think about it too much and start to mess it up again.
Yeah.
That's really interesting that there'd been some sort of learning consolidation that had taken place overnight. And so, and I found that quite consistent with learning.
And then when you're freshest in the morning after a great night of sleep, that's for a number of other reasons also why you perform at your best. And then, of course, as the day goes on, we would expect performance to gradually degrade. But if you're beginning the day on poor sleep, then you're actually starting already at degraded performance. And then it's all downhill from there. So
here's my question. So this very strong link between sleep and learning, how does this relate to behaviour change?
So I'm glad you asked. So changing our health behaviour, and if we think about all those things in lifestyle medicine, diet, exercise, reducing alcohol consumption, stopping cigarette smoking, paying more attention for sleep to sleep. That's a behaviour change in itself. Socialising with people and so on. They are all forms of learning. And importantly, we typically need to learn two things. So, for example, if you're making a dietary change, you need to learn information about diet, and that information might be to do with balancing intake of certain major nutritional components like carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, or it might mean learning the names of new food items that you're not currently familiar with. But there's also a procedural knowledge in there. For example, we need to learn how to prepare and create that food. We need to learn new pathways through the grocery store or the supermarket. We need to learn where to find new things that we're not currently used to looking for in the supermarket. And they're all procedural. We also need to learn how to deal with the emotional response to that change. And many people will tell you when they're in the process of a behavioural change, one of the challenges is dealing with the emotion. I really miss this food, or I really crave this food. And if we're not well slept and we haven't given ourselves that ability during sleep to process that emotion, then our capacity to do that during waking is greatly diminished. So, unsurprisingly, we need both those elements of sleep to really help us learn something new and apply that. We need the deep sleep to concretize the declarative knowledge. We need the REM sleep to rehearse and re-rehearse the procedural and emotional elements of that, so that the next day and the day after and the day after and so on, we can continue to do this. Now, interestingly, there's been about 10 years ago, I think, I dug up a research paper that looked pretty much at exactly this. The researchers looked at the various health habits of the subjects, also looked at tracking their sleep, and mapped this against the trans-theoretical model of change, which divides readiness for change into some possibly not so discrete categories, but in essence, contemplation, thinking about the possibility of it, preparation, getting ready to do it, action, actually doing it, and then maintenance, sustaining it over the long term. And what they found was that the people who essentially had poor sleeping patterns were much more likely to be in the contemplation, preparation, and to some extent action stages of change. The people who had good sleep habits were much more likely to be in the maintenance stage of change. So there's already some research that supports supports this, and there are other psychological models of change as well. For example, there's one of the models of change is called the COM-B model: capability, opportunity, motivation, and behaviour. And we know that capability and motivation are both shaped by sleep. So that model, although it doesn't expressly say it, that model is a sleep-dependent behaviour change model. The trans-theoretical model, as we've just heard, is a sleep-dependent behaviour change model. And, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I don't think it matters which model of behavioural change you choose. For the reasons that we've spoken about, all models of behavioural change are sleep-dependent models. So what this means in practice, for health coaches and for physicians and other health practitioners working with patients and clients who want to make a behavioural change, is that I think we need to get much more focused on being curious about the individual's sleeping patterns, their sleeping habits, how much they understand this, and simultaneously working with them where necessary to address poor sleep in order that they then get a satisfactory means of being able to process and integrate all the behavioural change that they're trying to. Because if you're not getting sleep and not getting good sleep and not getting it in that nice form that looks like plenty of deep sleep early in the night, plenty of REM sleep late in the night, then you're really minimising the chances that you're going to be successful with what could be a really crucial behavioural change.
Yeah. Do you know what? In all honesty, this is actually quite a paradigm shift for me, and I really like the direction you're going with this. I think if we view behaviour change as a learning process and a skill development process, that makes perfect sense to me. That sleep should be front and centre and a key consideration for those processes. So
yeah.
I love it. You've actually given me something to sleep on.
Well, after your next 8 hours, let me know what you've come up with.
Sounds good.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.